Is that a good idea, or should
with the guests, because then you get
Welcome everybody. Jerome's on vacation this week, so yours truly is getting another run at
not quite
practicing for next year. It's so exciting. I want to thank our Sergeant of Arms and assist who showed up this week. Sorry. Simon's more happy than you are, I'm sure. And Allison is not here, but Julie was our greeter today. Thank you very much. And we just want to start with singing "O Canada."
We're good this week?
Pardon?
We're going to do it this week?
Yeah.
And you're going to lead us.
There we go.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
So we'll raise our glasses and toast to Canada.
Canada?
To the Queen. Yep, she couldn't come. And to August. Because August is Rotary Celebrate Membership Month. Which means it's time to celebrate the Kitchener-Westmount Rotary Club, our members, and all the good we are doing in the community and around the world. So to us. So the other announcement I need to make before we move a little bit forward. Jerome has taken it upon himself to do a Rotarian of the Week. And this week, there's actually more Rotarians than just one that I want to recognize. The Rotarians are Simon Adler, Jim Kibble, Jack Kinch, Allison Scott, and Everton Wilmot. The reason I'm choosing those people is because I've been assigned bingo sign-up duty.
And you're not signed up?
No,
Oh,
they are all signed up for 3 or more times already this year. So I want to recognize them all for going above and beyond in bingo. And then on a side note, there's 23 of you that have not signed up this year. So I have the bingo sign-up sheet with me, and I'm going to put it over here because there's 17 spots left to fill to the end of the year. And I don't know if you want to pass it around, but I want to get it filled today. Or if not, hey, I want this off my desk until next week.
We want the other president. I feel we've been taken over the street. Simon, do we have a beach number?
Sorry. So let us pray. Lord of the universe, one of your wise ministers you said recently, you can judge a person by its checkbook stubs. As Rotarians, we are generally blessed with lives of relative luxury and opportunities unknown to many. Help us to review our checkbooks and indeed the registers of our lives with honesty as we consider our priorities, our opportunity to help others. Open our hearts, open our accounts to those in need, while still providing us with the appropriate fruits of our own labors. Help us to share not only our tangible wealth, but our intangible riches of knowledge, leadership, and creativity to make our city, our nation, and our world a better place filled with peace and love that you can bring through us. Amen.
Amen.
So do we have any guests of the club today?
Just our speaker,
Just our speaker, Caterina, will be introduced when she's about to speak. And then, I think that's, oh, now does, I'm sorry, Mr. Past President.
Yeah, what would you like?
Do we do all the other stuff after
Yeah.
lunch? Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll do lunch now?
This is where Leo escorts our guests
Yes,
to the.
to the-
Right this way.
I know, you can't stop him, he's a huge guy. Yeah, you're official. December 27th. September 18th, due date. We're hoping for a little earlier. But your birthday, we don't want to go later. Yeah, that'd be nice. You look at the belly growing. Pretty stressed out. Looks like you wake up early, but you're like, oh, it's surprising how much longer it can go. So, especially your first time. That's how it goes.
She's like this. She's like this.
Yeah, I know.
So where is Port Frank's in relation to Port?
You know what?
South.
Because we were this close to buying property in Point Clark.
Yeah. Point Clark is north of King Gardens, right? So you're good 150 kilometers from Point Clark down the shore. So I don't know.
There's a turn that has a sort of slight corner.
It's a nice place. I don't know when you go wrong with it. I think it's all good. Except for God. Oh, just because as a kid we played hockey against them all the time. Still mad. Still mad. No, they just always play dirty. No, it's a game. Goddard's is a game. I really can't speak to them. King Cardinals nice.
I don't have support on this kind of party. No, you haven't. I've been on stage.
I've never been on stage.
Very well, it's all done. I'm back. Acquainted with my wife.
A long term.
And you're running the show today.
So I'll get you some.
Let's make an
We just found out it's sponsored by the NRA. So he's gonna be down there all
that
over.
we can understand.
The worst redneck.
So haven't, no?
The guy was in there documenting her.
Yeah, that might work. I'll email you.
In the pool out at the side?
That little sort of reflecting pool.
My oldest. Oh, does it? That's how it is.
So you didn't see a lady with a hat going by with a bathing suit in her plastic bag.
Why is that corner perpetually under construction?
Oh, I don't know.
Like, it's been what, 5 years? That corner, like the 30.
I think they just go to Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw them putting in more pipes for the underground system. You guys did this 2 years ago?
Is this your baby one?
Wait until the other guys dug it up. Paved over nice and neat. Proper care. Then go back and dig it all over again. Coordinating everybody.
Yeah, he was.
A lot of it is
I just want a flyer at the actual.
These never seems to be done.
they dig, they get all done and then starting another dig.
Part of the package. We had to talk to him. He got out there.
That's frustrating. That, well, yeah, and then the other, I knew that all these LRT stations are already starting to deteriorate, and they haven't even seen a train yet. All the artistic stuff is starting to look weathered and faded, and you're like, wait a minute, a train!
I saw it the other day on the drive.
Another 2 weeks.
He said, there was a train, and I was thinking a vision.
They've been testing them for 6 months.
They'll do whatever they can to get paid until they let the rest show up.
I ended up making in front of the yeah.
I know, but imagine when trains are actually working.
I know.
All the doors up, the cars are coming up from all different areas. So everyone has a stop at the corner of Caroline and Herb.
Grandstand show, we'd go to that every year. That was always exciting.
I think my strategy is I'm gonna stay away from the trains until I get,
Now it's
yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna use them, but stay away. I'm gonna wait till we get that new stuff, and then, until someone's figured it out and explains it to me.
I signed up for this one.
That's already happened on Main Street. No, between Victoria and William, nobody drives Main Street. You guys don't get this. There's a transparent and there's 14 lights.
Exactly. Maybe that was their plan.
Yeah, I purposely stay away because I do a U-turn.
It's like, I don't wanna do a U-turn, I wanna go that way, I don't wanna go back where I came from.
And that discourages drivers.
Well, I just saw
I always think of the analogy of expense, like everything. You know, where would we be now? So hopefully the LRT's like that.
In Ottawa, they built an LRT 10 years ago. The whole train. And when they built it, everybody said, this is a train that goes from nowhere to nowhere. Because it was, Ottawa was very much an east-west city, and they built this LRT to the south. But 10 years later, everything's proliferated around that corridor. Now it's well used, well popular. Yeah, and I think that's the situation.
well, you already see all the
I use the analogy of, I just think about like, I drive. 50,000 more people are supposed to move into this city in 10 years. Do you want them to share the road with you, or would you like them to be on an LRT?
I was very kind of way down there today, driving my car behind the bicycle. And he was driving down the park. And I thought, you know, good for you, but I'd never go. Hear from him. But I thought, you know, respectful, because these guys take me one, at least a car off the road. And I was sitting nicely behind him.
Yeah, and then there's the cyclists that just run through red lights and they ruin it for ruin the reputation for some other cyclists that don't do
Sometimes cycle lanes don't really need to like go in the same direction as the cars. Sometimes cycle lanes are like two ways or cars go one way.
Be careful on the bike lane, that's the sidewalk, I mean, I've almost been hit by Caroline, the bike lane, the sidewalk. So I cross it to go to my car, and I've almost been hit by a bike, like, every time. On Caroline.
Like what used to be a sidewalk is now a bike lane.
Yeah. When they put the LRT, and they took up the bike lane for transit.
When also for the park by using like the path, now it's the cycle lane. And part of the footpath with the bridge and everything, and in the meantime, it used to be shared somehow.
It's the same on the Weaver Street.
Yeah.
At the train station, it goes from bikes. Like you're supposed to go on the sidewalk, walking underneath the train tracks. Because it's a hill too, like they just... And they're not all professional cyclists in that neighborhood. They're a little different. So it's a little scary. Of course they get married.
I heard that while he was getting his
With a guy.
loaner bikes.
Shared.
Shared bikes where you can go with your laptop.
Yeah, Kitchener, downtown Kitchener. Yeah, yeah.
And there's been Victoria now, the thing
They are all very
they're
different.
not
All very
dogs.
significant.
So the bikes all over the
No
city.
way.
You can find the bike laying on the curb somewhere.
I thought that's how you get the bike in and out, is by using your credit card.
Well, you do.
Yeah.
But no, it's on the bike. And you use your.
I think this is actually on the rack.
So the bikes are all over the city.
I don't ride bicycles very much. I don't pay that much attention. Clearly.
So but in Barcelona, they do have this system, but they have racks. So you go to the system and you get bike with your card.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can
Controlled by
drive
the
it
rack,
back.
right? Yeah.
But for instance, in Oslo, it's not like that. It's not like what you were saying. You have an app in your phone that tells you where you are. So you walk and there's a bike down in the street, and you take it and you use your card to unlock your, have like a device that unlocks the wheel, and then you can use it. And when you want to stop using it, you lock it with your card and
Okay, so it's supposed to be like that, it's just a bit more, the distribution is more wide, because it'll be wherever someone stops.
yeah, so the idea is nice. The problem is that there's just bikes lying everywhere. Yeah, but if there's no like place, leave them.
Kids are using them for school.
And
And they're great. So they're used to fine. But it's almost.
Here.
How do you think they come up with that?
I'll fill it right up there.
That's good.
Oh, we do have some left over. When we moved here, you heard about Big Creek. I got a new job here.
Majority are 2, and then there's like 4 or 5 that are 3 and 4. I did notice that, Max, sorry.
My kids have extracurriculars everything. It's always, it's always in transport. That's why I tried to figure it out. I signed up once and I was out of the car and Bill was like, "Strum and Bing." I'm like, "What are you?" So I don't know when I can do it. That's all I wasn't up there.
I know, there's usually one half of New Year's Eve, yeah, you can have Christmas and New Year's Eve, might be.
I'm a month ago.
No meat left. Oh, there's so many.
Like 4 times.
I feel guilty. A whole patty.
chicken bun instead. You know what I don't think about?
I would just try to put some
Yeah. Yeah.
and put some scary. Literally, so
There's a story behind that.
But he's still you know how some of those are the only ones that ever did without the other place.
I know.
They're not. I like it. Me too. So you had a. And we'll go to the vermicelli. Or the soba, or whatever country you want to cook your noodle from.
Well, not any worse than me. Thinking while I'm reading this.
You know the weird thing about this?
Before I got up here.
You know that Vietnamese restaurants like noodle shops like every corner. But no soba noodle. You go to Toronto, like you can get awesome soba. I guess there's just not enough Japanese people.
It's like CRO kind of even. CRA is the same.
We just don't have any Japanese communities. Any Japanese restaurants that are in the center are actually owned by Koreans.
Zero is good enough.
That are pretending to be Japanese.
So the Koreans don't do
No, they're.
Because I like
I know, like there's a couple places in Toronto I love to go. It's so good. Get some nice food. They crack it in on the top all the time.
I should have tried to get my name on it.
We don't get that. I shouldn't complain, but the dining is improving in the city. 10 years ago when I moved here, there was not a lot of dining options.
Japanese place, they do like rice. They don't do soba.
Which one? The one in
Hundred-ish.
Okay, I must be
I mean, the name put me off for a time until I once decided to try it. And it's like people, like Japanese
I'll give it a shot. It's close to home.
It's in the company.
No, we don't have any real good Thai. We don't have any really good. I don't try home.
Well, it's either that or
Have you gone to,
Yeah.
It's not fairly
But Jack, if you had
That's what, when I go to Toronto now, it's kind of like, I always go for the Japanese,
Well, I came to visit, trying to share the love.
or Italian. Because there isn't a lot of great Italian restaurants here.
There was one
What, Enyo's?
no, the name is
In Kitchener? Oh, 271, that's on King Street. That's not actually Italian. They make their own pasta.
They have, yeah, perhaps it's not Italian, but they have good pasta.
Oh, I like the restaurant. It's actually it's a Serbian guy that's married to a Croatian guy. And if you go on Mondays, they make homemade pastries. Donuts, like, not Mondays, Tuesdays. Tuesdays, they make homemade donuts for free. With your
I'm gonna pass on.
Continue on with the meeting now. The announcements, actually, Today is National Relaxation Day. Thank you, Jack, for giving me the suggestion of taking warm health. Yeah, and I thought it was appropriate because Caterina is speaking about sustainable health, so I thought relaxation could fit into that as well. There's no members' birthdays today. There's no spouses' birthdays today. Anniversaries, Raymond Millard and Nan are 59 years on August 17th, 1959. John Rose is not here, but it's his second anniversary. He was officially a member 2 years ago today. I don't know if anybody has any announcements or new business to discuss. Do you?
We all
Yeah?
signed up for it.
Sorry to interrupt your last
Thanks, Laura. Just to remind everybody, a week Friday is the fish and chips and horseshoe. We've got about a dozen people signed up so far, so I will be sending out a reminder. And if you're free next Friday night, a week this Friday, we'll be there. Okay, Leo's going to be there, so that he usually attracts a crowd. Okay. Are you bringing your entourage? Yeah, it's possible.
And we do have bingo signed up, everybody from the following week, just so Jack knows that Trish has been added onto the sheet.
Are you sure?
I know it was really bothering you.
No. Why she's gonna cancel it.
So now we'll do the 50-50 draw. It's $54 today. Well, David won it last week. $42? $42, I'm sorry. The last four numbers are 4389.
Oh, yeah.
Every marble.
4397.
Oh.
This table.
Yeah.
Let's get one more.
This is a great coffee. Yeah. Not a lot of us.
4400.
Oh. Pretty close.
Good for the board.
Yeah.
Any of those tables down there?
There's a seat here, Joy.
Yeah, Laura, right beside you.
Didn't want to leave that bad.
Looks like he's found a seat.
So we'll have Karen come up and introduce our speaker.
Our speaker this week is familiar. When I walked in, I thought, did I forget to make a badge for a new member? She's here again. One more time and you're going to become a member. Caterina. So Caterina Lindman, FCIA, FSA, is an actuary for Manulife Financial, working on repricing adjustable products in Manulife's Canadian division in Waterloo, Ontario. She is recognized as a leading actuary in Canada, internationally, in the area of climate change research, and that's what she spoke to us last time about. She is the chairperson of the Climate Index Working Group, which is a collaborative effort between the SOA, the Canadian Institution of Actuaries, the American Academy of Actuaries, and the Casualty Actuarial Society, and forms a subcommittee of the CAS Climate Change Committee. I think what she's going to talk to us about is going to be a lot easier than this was to read. Caterina.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me again. Sweet. Oh, I need the clicker. Or do I just do up and down? All right. And yes, so thank you. Out of my interest in climate change, I joined Susan's climate lobby, so we lobby for building the political will for carbon fee and dividend, and that's what I spoke to you about last month. And then as I did more research, I've discovered that there's compelling reasons to to look at our food systems, and our food systems are also a key to sustainability. And so I learned that what we eat really impacts our environment. And then not only that, I also learned that the standard American diet is impacting our health. And the actuaries did a study a few years ago, and they concluded that our healthcare system in Canada is unsustainable, because if you what we did was we projected healthcare costs depending on the demographics of Canada, with the aging population, and if people have the same sort of incidence rates and the amount of money being transferred from the federal government to the provincial government, unless we do something, raise revenues that come into the provincial government, or cut benefits, or something else to maybe improve health, the government will just kind of run out of money. Like, it won't be able to sustain our healthcare system, like over the next 25 years kind of thing. So this is an important topic for a lot of reasons. The sustainability of our planet. We've learned a bit about climate change last month. I'm sure you've read about it in the news and know some things. So that's what I'm going to cover today, is the sustainability of the standard American diet and how it impacts the planet and our own health. Okay, so this is the agenda. We're going to review a little bit about the standard American diet. There's an important study out of Oxford on reducing food's environmental impacts that I found very informative. And there's also mitigating risk. So we have planetary risks to the health system, so we can mitigate that through whole plant-based foods. And then lastly, a little bit about our organization, Actuaries for Sustainable Healthcare. I have cards that describe Actuaries for Sustainable Healthcare, like little business cards, and I'm asking you to pick one up on your way out so that you can learn more. Okay, so next slide. Why is that not advancing?
It's advancing on the screen.
Oh, it is. Okay, it's not advancing here. Okay, so let me go back then and look at the screen and see what we're doing. Okay. No. All right, so I'm going to go through this quote and, oh wait, let me try this. How come what we see isn't what we get? Okay, so I'm going to keep on going without the slides saying what I'm saying. So Wendell Berry did an interesting quote. Wendell Berry is an author, a philosopher, a poet, a farmer, and he said this quote: "People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food." Now this is a bit of a hyperbole statement, hyperbolic, but I think he has a good point that in general the health industry does ignore food and the impacts that food can have on health, and vice versa. The food industry is pushing what's profitable, not necessarily what's healthy. Okay, so the standard American diet. One feature of it is that we have refined grains in the standard American diet instead of whole grains. So on the left is a whole grain, and you'll notice it has three parts: the bran, the endosperm, and the wheat germ, or the germ of the whole grain. And the bran has fiber, which is really important in our diets, and it also has vitamins and minerals. And the wheat germ is also a nutrient-packed core with B vitamins, vitamin E, and phytonutrients. So phytonutrients are plant-based nutrients, and there's healthy fats in that wheat germ. But because of processing in our standard American diet, we just have the refined grains. So we get rid of the bran and the wheat germ in an effort to make the food more shelf stable, and it also tastes better without the bran and the wheat germ. Or I guess we're more used to that taste. And they didn't leave the refined grain quite like that, then they enrich it. So they add back a few of the vitamins and minerals they took out. Not as many as they've taken out, like they've added back 4 or 5, but they've taken out maybe 25 vitamins and minerals. And none of the phytonutrients got replaced. And here's the standard American diet. This is just a graph, it's hard to see, but 1961 to 2013 of more meat, egg, and dairy consumption. So this is showing globally how much more meat we eat on a per capita basis. So over that time period, the amount of meat per person has more than doubled, from about 20 kilograms to 40 kilograms. Of course, in Canada and the United States, we're more on the order of 180 kilograms per person per year. And you can see that the big increases are in the blue, which is the poultry at the bottom, and then the second from the bottom, pork. That has increased. So what's happened overall is the population's more than doubled, the per capita meat consumption has more than doubled. So as of 2013, we were having 424% more meat produced, or it's 4.24 times what we had in 1961. One of the implications of that is there's been an increased use in antibiotics, and scientists are concerned that antibiotics might not work as well because of just the amount of antibiotics being used. 80% of antibiotics are fed to animals. They largely do that because of concentrated animal feeding operations, so they're sort of trying not to have those animals get sick, so they give them antibiotics. But it is causing a concern that maybe we're going to have resistant forms of antibiotics, and with this potential risk of maybe we can't do surgery anymore, and that would be a very bad outcome. There's more sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and the standard American diet is just something that evolved after World War I and more so after World War II. So this graph starts in 1820 and shows per capita sugar consumption. Now this is not the sugar you find in fruits, it's the sugar that is refined and includes high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup also took a spike towards 1970 when the American government subsidized corn production. So prior to that, they were paying farmers not to grow corn, to leave some of their land fallow, and the idea was to restrict the supply so that the price would stay high and the farmers would be able to earn a living. And then the government said, well, let's not pay farmers not to grow corn, let's pay farmers to grow corn. So then the subsidies changed to enable the farmer, or ask the farmers to make all their land full of corn. Corn is heavily subsidized, and 30% of that goes to make high fructose corn syrup. So then that replaced the sugar that was in pop with high fructose corn syrup, which was less expensive. The standard American diet continued. Okay. We have more added fats. So the problem with added fats is that they aren't good for your health. If you eat the fats that sort of occur naturally within plants, then you're getting fiber and phytonutrients as well, and that's just better for you. And fats are also a problem for atherosclerosis, which we'll talk more about later. There's more salt added to processed foods, and the problem with too much salt is high blood pressure, which is a risk factor for heart disease, which is our #1 killer, as well as it's implicated with stomach cancer. The standard American diet has fewer fruits and vegetables, and fruits and vegetables are really important for their phytonutrients and their fiber, and have cancer-fighting properties. This is a graph showing the healthcare costs. So the flatter line is in constant $1970, and you can see that it's increased a lot per capita, less than $2,000 to approximately $4,000 as of 2014. I have a slide for the US. It's even more dramatic and higher. So in the constant dollars, it's more than doubled over that same time period. Okay, so to give you a quick overview of the Oxford Food Study. This study was a 5-year study using life cycle analysis. It just came out this year, and it was groundbreaking. It covers 90% of the world's food production. So what they did was they modeled it like a top-down model with a lot of inputs, and then made it kind of all balanced so that it made sense for a good model of what's happening with all the inputs and outputs. It measures 5 indicators. So these were the 5 most important things they wanted to measure for the environment. The first is greenhouse gas emissions, which is very important for mitigating climate change. The second is land use. Land use is important for a lot of reasons. One is the amount of land that's used. Sometimes it gets deforested, and that means that if it's deforested, there's less biodiversity, and the trees aren't there, or the natural vegetation, which is a sink for carbon. So as you deforest, you get the impact of increasing emissions because you're not absorbing that carbon, and you're losing land for wild flora and fauna. Terrestrial acidification, another word for this is acid rain. So this is not good because it also reduces biodiversity, particularly of plants, and kills some of the plants. Eutrophication is when there's manure or fertilizer runoff from the rivers, from the farmland to the rivers to the oceans. And at first it creates an algae bloom, so there's sort of an increase in plant life. But then it grows so much that it starves the water of oxygen and creates an ocean dead zone. And lastly, water use, and it was weighted by water scarcity. So in other words, not only did they look at how much water was used, but as a percentage of how much water there was. And water scarcity is becoming an increasing concern with climate change and increasing population. So this is basically what the study found, was that the study was divided between what was as a result of animal agriculture, so animals, meat, eggs, dairy, and fish farming, aquaculture, versus growing plants directly for human consumption. And they found that animal agriculture provides 18% of our calories, but uses 83% of our land, and about 57% of our emissions. So we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, that water pollution, and the sulfuric acid, the acid rain. So that implies then, if we were to switch make those 72% of calories that we get from plants equal to 100%, we would just have to, we would free up a lot of land, about 79% of it. And that, if we let it grow, just go back to nature, would mean that we have more animals, plants, trees, and that would be a natural carbon sink. So that would reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and help us stabilize the climate. It was also reduce agriculture-based emissions by a fair amount.
Caterina?
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm surprised that the meat consumption is only 18%.
Of our calories?
Yeah. Considering all the factors you talked about.
Well, yes. Now, we're in the standard American diet, so this is globally.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. You're right, yes. I'm going to give you 5 reasons, and this comes from the Oxford study, why animals are more resource intensive than plants. Because the author of the study was saying, well, what they were trying to do was find sustainable meat and dairy production. How can we make it more sustainable?
And then, so these are 5 reasons why, there is a bit of a physical, biophysical difference between growing plants or growing plants and then feeding the animals that. So one is that conversion to the edible protein ratio is at least 2 to 1. So in other words, if you have protein and you feed it to the animal, you need at least twice as much protein to get the same amount of protein back had you just eaten the protein in the first place from a plant source. 2/3 of deforestation is due to animal agriculture. So forests are being deforested to either grow plants or pasture, make pasture for animals, particularly cattle is notorious for that. And then there's just these physical processes. So enteric fermentation means that some animals produce enteric fermentation. So they're fermenting the grass that they eat, and that creates methane emissions, which is more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Manure is an issue because we were saying that sometimes that runs off into our rivers and oceans and creates eutrophication. And then aquaculture ponds produce emissions, more so than just growing plants. There's higher emissions for processing animals versus processing plants, and they're more prone to spoilage. So, and you have to have a bit more energy to ship them and keep them at the right temperature and so on. Okay, according to the world's largest organization of nutrition professionals, okay, so now I'm going to talk about the health impacts of animal agriculture. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, vegetarian and vegan diets are healthful, may prevent and treat chronic diseases, and are better for the environment. Oh, and I missed saying a quote from the Oxford study. So this was the author of the study, Joseph Poore, who said this. And when he's summarizing his research, he said, "A vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, not just greenhouse gases, but acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use." So all 5 indicators. And Joseph Poore, after a year of the study, decided to go vegan. So he had seen enough of the impacts. Okay, so our #1 killer, and this is true in both Canada and the US, is atherosclerosis, or heart disease. So what you have on the left is a normal blood vessel, and what you have on the right is when you have atherosclerosis. So what's happened is that the cholesterol builds up plaque inside your artery. That causes the artery to stiffen, it causes the artery to narrow. Those plaques could break off and give you a heart attack or a stroke. So that's the danger. And this chart here shows all the risk factors for atherosclerosis. And the first 9 things are risk factors, but they're not necessary to form those plaques that you get on the artery. But having a cholesterol problem, i.e. too much cholesterol in your blood, is necessary to form those plaques. So the best way to avoid heart disease and even reverse it is not to have any dietary cholesterol. Cholesterol is exclusively found in animal products, meat, eggs, dairy, and fish, and is never found in plants. And moreover, if you have plants and you eat plants with fiber in them, that'll help clean out the cholesterol in your blood. This is a chart about calorie density and what 500 calories looks like in your stomach. So on the right, you've got fruits and veggies. So 500 calories worth of fruits and veggies will fill you up. So will 500 calories of potatoes, rice, and beans. Whereas 500 calories of oil, cheese, or meat do not fill up your stomach. So you'll still want more food. So that's an illustration of why whole plant-based foods will keep you lean and satisfied. Cancer is another sort of our next biggest killer after heart disease. And the question is, are we winning the war on cancer? And I think the answer is no, not really. So if we look at adult cancers and people often go through chemotherapy with that. The extra survival that you get after 5 years that's due to the chemotherapy is only about 2%. So it's not as effective as we think it is. And the scientists have written research papers and concluded that really the purpose of chemotherapy is it's more of a palliative treatment. It maybe helps you feel better so that the tumors aren't growing as fast. Now, given all the side effects of chemotherapy, one has to wonder. So one suggestion is that we focus on prevention rather than simply early detection and then treating it. So insulin growth factor 1 has been proven to help cancer cells grow. And IGF-1 is found in animal products. So as you digest animal products, your body will create IGF-1, which helps those cancer cells grow. Angiogenesis, that word means it's the beginning of a blood vessel. And when cancer cells grow, once they're the size of a ballpoint pen tip, they need blood vessel. They need a blood supply so that tumor can grow. And angiogenesis is how they do that. They'll grow a new blood vessel. And plants, though, some plants have been found to be anti-angiogenesis. So things like broccoli and green tea, for example, as well as other plants, help those blood vessels not form. Apoptosis, that's a programmed death of cancer cells. And again, plants have been shown to help those cancer cells die. You always have cancer cells in your body, and if you do eat a lot of plants, then that keeps those cancer cells out of control so they don't actually grow big enough to grow a tumor. And lastly, toxins bioaccumulate up the food chain. So we do have a lot of pollution in our world, and if the pollution's found in the ground, then the plants will absorb it. But if an animal eats those plants and eats a lot of them, those toxins will magnify as they go up the food chain. So in general, a larger fish is going to be more toxic than a smaller fish. A larger animal that eats animals will have more toxins than just an animal that doesn't eat animals, but just eats plants. And plants would be the least toxic of all. Okay, so in conclusion, we can de-risk our health and food systems by eating less beef, and that's because beef was even worse than the other animal products in terms of environmental impact. Eating less animal products, because that will make you healthier and also help the environment. Eating less processed foods, so you're avoiding that sugar, salt, and fat that they often add to processed foods, and the lack of fiber in processed foods. And eating more whole plant-based foods will also help de-risk our health and food systems. So what role now I'm an actuary, so what role can actuaries play in de-risking our health and food systems? One is eating more whole plant-based foods. So this is kind of like the Gandhian principle, be the change you want to see in the world. I think if actuaries did that, that would help. Compensating healthcare providers for whole food plant-based nutrition. So right now, doctors get paid fee for service. So they'll get paid for writing a prescription, a 15-minute doctor visit, sending you to a specialist, doing procedures, so on and so on. And it's not a sustainable healthcare model because we're not getting at the root cause of diseases. About 80% of our healthcare costs are due to chronic conditions, which wouldn't exist if we had a whole food plant-based diet. Dr. Burkitt was a medical missionary to Africa, and 35 years ago, this is what he said: many of the major and commonest diseases in modern Western cultures are universally rare in third world communities, were uncommon even in the United States until after World War I, yet have comparable prevalence today in both black and white Americans. This finding compels the conclusion that these diseases must be due not to our genetic inheritance, but to our lifestyle. This conclusion in turn argues that they must be potentially reversible. So since then, there have been lots of studies showing that heart disease is reversible, and so is diabetes, being overweight, high blood pressure through whole food plant-based nutrition. Another thing actuaries can do is demonstrating success in employee benefits. So, for example, in Canada, we could do wellness programs within a workplace and then design a system that compensates doctors for talking about nutrition. Like, one of the problems is doctors don't learn this in medical school. They learn how to do surgeries and how to write prescriptions, and general things about the body, but not much on nutrition. And another thing is advocating for pilot projects provincially. So the Ontario Health Insurance Program, it compensates doctors on a fee-for-service model. We would, it would be good to do a pilot project where we have community-based health information given, and then see how that can impact our community. So I'm hoping to actually get something like that going in Kitchener-Waterloo as sort of my next career step. And yeah, so that's what I'd like to do with the rest of the next few years of my life. Here's some resources for more information. Actuaries for Sustainable Healthcare. We have a website, and we have a card that I'd like if you could pick one up on the way home. And here's some documentaries. Forks Over Knives changed my life when I watched it in 2014 over Christmas. And I asked my husband to watch it too. And then we started experimenting with whole food plant-based cooking. And for Lent, we decided we would go vegan. And I've been sort of transitioning to vegan and feel great about that because I have a lot more energy. I've lost some weight. My cholesterol was high, and now it's not. So I really appreciate that extra energy, and it's nice to weigh what I weighed in my 20s again. And another resource is Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen, and so he's picked the dozen best foods to eat. So if you eat those foods, you won't really have room for unhealthy foods. And then there's an app, a free app, available both on Android and the other devices, I guess iPhones. And it's something to check out. So it is now 21 after. We have time for questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
You talk about whole foods. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Okay, a whole food means that it's plant-based as well. That's not overly processed. So whole food's processed, right? You got to wash it, you got to scrub it or whatever. But if it's over-processed, maybe bad things are taken out of the food, like the fiber, or good things are taken out of the food, such as the fiber, or bad things are added to it. A whole food would exclude oil, because oil comes from taking a plant, squeezing it, and getting rid of the fiber, and just finding a little bit of oil and getting rid of everything else. A French fry wouldn't be a whole food because it's been fried. Is that?
Yeah, okay. More definition.
I have a question.
Yes, Matt.
I guess the challenge that I see, there's nothing here that really shocked me.
Right.
But it seems like a meat-based diet is a byproduct of wealth, more so than anything. The one thing that coincides with this increase in sugar and meat consumption from World War I is wealth.
Yes.
North America has become wealthier and wealthier, and we see this now in developing nations as well.
Yeah.
Where they get more money, guess what's the first thing to buy? Get a pig, let's have some, So conservation as a strategy just seems, it's not working. I don't know what else to say. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but telling people to curb their consumption seems like an ineffective strategy. It's like when people tell us to use less water when we're surrounded by the Great Lakes. I'm not in a desert. I have a tough time. I'm in the Great River watershed. I was just on Lake Huron, which is like the second largest freshwater in the world, and they're saying, "Oh, watch your water consumption." It's not equating.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or they tell us to use less energy. Don't turn your air conditioner off even though it's like 35 degrees. Mm-hmm. It's not working.
Right.
And so what?
No, this is yeah.
Like, what is the strategy what's going to incent people, really incent people, to eat more plant-based, to not get those chicken fries with your ham double cheeseburger?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of cultural forces that are leaning towards, not whole food plant-based diet, right? Yeah. Like it tastes good. There's a bunch of people who are engineering food like Doritos so that you can't like stop eating them once you start. I think like why I'm excited about this is I think that health is the big driver, so that people, like, it's awful kind of watching your loved ones sort of have a heart attack and have to have open heart surgery and that. So that's what I'm hoping, because I was there before I learned about the health impacts, is I thought, how can I get people excited about reducing their greenhouse gas emissions? Like, what's the...
Well, in my family, I would say that cancer is more common than the flu. Like literally, like every one of my great aunts and uncles has had some form of cancer in the last decade, and none of them have changed their diets whatsoever.
Right.
I just saw all of them, and this huge health scare has not changed that part of their life. They might be exercising, they might be doing a couple other things, but their diets aren't changing. Even health is not enough to scare. Like, what is it that I just am really curious to see what it will take.
Okay.
To curb.
Me too. Because I'm gonna at least try the whole information route, and you're more likely to do it if you have a group of friends that you're doing it with. So we would want to build supports and community-based knowledge, and so it's not so weird.
Vegan, buddy, you and me.
Just a comment on what he just said. So, for instance, a few months ago in the UK, they imposed higher taxes on products that had a high content of sugar. So, like, from one day to the next, you would go to the supermarket and then prices would be higher. Well, you don't pay the tax at the till, you just see the tax reflected on the price of the product. And it would be higher because it will have, that's how you can tell what things have a lot of sugar and what things don't have that much sugar. And there was like a whole campaign in supermarkets, telling their customers it's not that we're trying to rip you off, it's that, this is the new tax policy that the government has. So, I don't know.
Yeah, because small changes like over a big population really matter, right?
That's the incentive, because the cost of meat has actually decreased with inflation over the course of the last 40 years.
Yes. Yes, we've actually had a good price on carbon. It would make the price of meat and eggs and dairy go up relative to plants. And that would, I think, help. Yes.
I'd just be interested to see some of your data disaggregated by industrial agriculture versus the small farmholder agriculture. Certainly on the, I think that industrial agriculture is only responsible for like 20% of global agriculture, and they're responsible for like 80% of the use of resources for that.
Yes, yes.
So, I mean,
so one of the things that the study pointed out was like, wow, we've got this huge variation even within food category, and we need labeling so that consumers can tell, is this like a really big impact piece of beef or is this a low impact piece of beef? Although all the beef would be higher than any of the veggies, but yeah.
But it's still
kind of. So labeling is another tactic for helping consumers do the right thing.
I have a question about this increase in health care that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, because I can think of two reasons why that would increase per person. It could be the case that people need more medical assistance, or it could also be the case that the same medical assistance that they had before is now expensive because the cost of medicine or the salary that you pay to a doctor or whatever has increased. So how is this taken into account when doing this study? Do you know?
Yeah, well, it looked at demographics, and it did do estimates for how much the cost of medicine would go up versus inflation. So we do have that. Even in constant dollars, the cost of healthcare is going up. So they were both put in with projections of what was a good estimate of what that might be. Because it's over 25 years, right? No one really knows exactly how it's going to go. So we do assumptions in actuarial science with projections.
Thank you very much. This was a very disheartening speak. Because I am a true meatitarian to the heart. like Leo, so I'm looking at this and thinking, wow, I'll be gone first. And we here at our meeting is not helping because we have beef every other week. So, but thank you for coming in once again. This time went a lot smoother than last time, less technical issues. And that was very interesting. I really think it comes down to dollars. It's going to be a money thing before we have any major change, but that's my personal opinion. Everybody looks at everything in money.
Right. So that's why I think actuaries can help if we tilt the financing of it, right?
Yeah.
Like so.
And as you're aware from your last visit, we have restored the eyesight of Brahma from Kenya, Africa, female, young female, age 4, in your name.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to the meeting, and we'll see everybody next week.
We need to break consumption, right? That's the bottom line. But what's going to make you short? Yeah. If it's still functioning on it, you know, like, it's hard to say, well, I can't afford that.
You got that summer gear off.
Yes.
Well, it depends why you're going vegan, I guess. So if you're concerned about people suffering, you don't want eggs.
Yeah, I've done like
Or dairy.
usually around Monday. I'll either go vegetarian or like even I've done with my wife the Dogs Fast, which is 50 days. That's a vegan diet for 50 days. Other than shrimp, you get a shrimp. I don't know why shrimp. It doesn't have a backbone. I don't know if it's technically, you're only supposed to have shrimp and that's it. And vegetables. You know what's harder is the.
I'm off dairy next week.
Dairy's harder to give up than meat.
So at least you're not
Pasta and bread. I could give up meat before I give that up.
But yeah, I did it all like this. I don't know.
Yeah, and if
You have that receipt for that outhouse check that I gave you? Is it in the envelope?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah, that Everton gave me. I haven't even looked at those yet, so, yeah. Gave it to me yesterday.
I just tucked it into the.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, let me know if you're around tomorrow or Friday, if you can have a drink or, okay.
And they add more salt to it, right?
Tomorrow's Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Either the other's fine.
All right, okay. Why don't I come by tomorrow and we'll have a drink and we'll plan out our theater experiences. Yeah.
2 questions.
What's that?
One, can we have a meeting at some point next week
Yeah, who's gonna eat all the cheese?
to talk about the KW Trivia Challenge?
Okay.
Where,
Why do I need to meet? Not that I object to meeting, I will meet, but.
because I would like to make hospice of Waterloo Region the charity.
Oh, okay,
I would like to
sorry.
give you money. Would you like to receive
yes,
money?
I will take money. I thought you meant for a Rotary thing. I'm thinking, what do I have to do for that? You know, I thought I had to do something.
No. So if
Okay.
we could meet maybe next week at some point.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know what your schedule's like, but
Yeah, next week's a little crowded, but I'll send you an email.
let me know because I really have to get it.
Yeah.
I'm way behind.
Okay.
Drop me with you just to have a
Sure, yeah.
And then, because
Can you come to my office?
Yeah,
We'll-
yeah. My
okay.
office is close to your office.
Happy to do that. Happy
Okay,
to do that.
perfect. Then a bookkeeping question, just out of
Sure.
the blue. You get an HST refund, what do you file that under? Because I know you do a lot of bookkeeping.
What do I file it under for the club?
You know, like
or-
QuickBooks?
Oh, in QuickBooks, yeah.
What do you file HST refunds
There's
under?
usually, well, I'm gonna fill in one of these dates. There's usually, when you do your HST,